As you can imagine, it's been a difficult year for Palestinian poets and writers and musicians to keep creating. At the same time, a lot of people are paying more attention to Palestinian art than they ever have before. Today, you'll hear from Palestinian artists about creating in such a difficult year. I'm Elamin Abdul Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, a couple of weeks ago, we started the show, and I asked you to take a deep breath. I'm going to ask you to do that again. Let's just take a big, deep breath. We're about to have a conversation that we promised you a few weeks back. On October 7th, the anniversary of the Hamas attacks, I sat down for a searching, reflective conversation with a Jewish writer and a Jewish photographer about how art can be of service, how it can give shape and meaning to the memory of that day, and maybe offer a way forward. It was one very small piece of a much bigger conversation. What we really did not get into was the horrific aftermath of that day. I'm referring to the virtual annihilation of Gaza, the deaths of more than 40,000 Palestinians, and the expansion of Israel's war. Today, I want to zero in on another part of the conversation. Today, we're talking about how the past year has changed what it means to be an artist with Palestinian roots, how Palestinians are using art to give shape and meaning to the experiences of this past year, and also how, amid all the destruction, these artists are helping Palestinian culture be a part of new conversations. It's an idea that the Palestinian poet Mus'ab Abu Toha planted a few months ago when I spoke with him.
I think memory and poetry and music, these things are untouchable by the occupation. But on the contrary, the more they destroy our lives, the more they destroy houses and schools and hospitals, the more we see people shred into pieces, the more poems we have. But unfortunately, these poems and the music that we are going to listen to and the songs, the more heartbreaking these poems and these pieces of art would be. I mean, we will continue to have poems. And I think we are hearing new poets in Gaza now, because everything that's in Gaza pushes people there to become talented, to discover their talent, because I can't explain what I can see. I can't explain it in simple words. I need to use something that's not casual. I need to use poetry and music in order to express what I feel.
There's a lot going on there. That is a part of my conversation with Mus'ab Abu Toha, and it's like this idea that I'm really interested in, and it's an idea that we're going to explore today with two Palestinian Canadians. Saeed Teebi is an author, and John Kameel Farah is a composer and pianist currently based between Toronto and Berlin. Saeed and John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Hey, Elamin.
Hi, I'm really grateful that you're here. Look, Saeed, I'm going to start with you on this. There's no easy way, I think, to pick an entry point for this conversation. It's been a year. As much as you feel comfortable, maybe, talk about how you were feeling last October and over this past year. What was your response or your reaction as a writer?
My response for me personally, and sort of recognizing what Mus'ab has just talked about, that literature and art sort of will never go away. For me, I had the opposite reaction. My reaction was that of muteness, to be honest. As a writer, you always feel like there's some kind of difference that you're making, even if the only difference is that you're creating new things, new ways to express yourself. In light of the massive destruction, that feeling went away, and I had a sense of, in its place, uselessness, the uselessness of what I was doing as a writer. And that sense of uselessness caused a kind of paralysis when it came to the writing I was producing. I simply couldn't write. As writers, it's easy to think of what we do as sort of some kind of essential service or calling. It's not actually, in compared to somebody who's making food or providing medical care. It's certainly not immediately useful. And so when I saw what was going on, and not even being there to do something as simple as fish people out of rubble or tell stories to pass the time for little children who are undergoing immense trauma, was it was difficult for me to justify spending time creating imaginary characters and living in those alternate worlds when our world was so broken.
That's a heavy thing to sort of sit with the notion of frozenness, with the notion of feeling like the art that you pursue, that you spend your time pursuing, does not feel useful. We were talking before we started taping here about the pile of books that is like right behind you, about the idea of, hey, these are books that I'm sort of using to maybe pull me to the next place, the next thing that I want to write. How do you get out of feeling that frozen, do you think, Saeed?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was, I think, a two-step process. First, I had to convince myself on a rational level that what we do as artists is a valuable thing. And that took a lot of thinking and consideration in a way that, frankly, I had not done before. I've always written because I felt I wanted to, rather than because it was some kind of like higher calling or something of cosmic importance. And so to think about why we do this on an elemental level was a new thing. And once I sort of convinced myself on that intellectual level that it was necessary, then it was a question of how to make my heart do it. There was no way to do it except to just plow through it and try every day until it no longer felt wrong to do so. I wrote an essay about why it's important to do so, and I just, to be honest, read that essay a few times to myself. It was my personal pep talk to continue writing and write anew.
John, I want to get to you on the same question, but also I'm cognizant of the fact that I can hear so much emotion in Saeed's voice, the idea of trying to make your heart do something. Is there a starting place, Saeed, where you go like, okay, this is how you maybe urge your heart to go to a place that is not quite ready to do so, especially given everything that you're seeing?
Well, I think for me, the key was when I saw artists in Gaza, people who witnessed far worse things than I did, and witnessed them right before their eyes, as opposed to through the barrier of photography. I witnessed them actually going about the things that Musab Abatoha talked about, creating more art, and singing to each other, and telling each other stories, and writing poetry. And it always felt to me that even though I felt useless doing that stuff, they clearly saw the value in it. And why couldn't I also see the value? Particularly from my place of privilege, I actually have more space to do these things than they do. So it seemed wrong not to try.
John, over to you. As much as you're comfortable sort of talk to me about how you're feeling last October. What was your response, your reaction as an artist? You're in a different place.
Yeah, I guess in the first month or two, I felt like it was an affront to just make music. The idea of just being creative like I normally would felt like to make light of everything that I was witnessing. And I felt completely frozen. And until I kind of started feeling, also in conversations with friends and loved ones, that I had a kind of a responsibility. And then I got a sense when I, put my toes in the water that people really wanted to hear from me and from other artists, that they were searching for something. They felt as just as lost as I did, and that I had a responsibility to address that somehow. And I had to feel my way out as I went in front of audiences. How am I going to not only make music, but to place my words in between the pieces? I had to address it. The response I got, trying to be sensitive to my audiences, that was what they wanted. And so it's sort of a mutual healing process that's going on and also in trying to move the dialogue about all these issues that are being confronted now.
Well, I'm interested in this, John, because before October 7th, you sort of chose not to foreground your Palestinian background. That was not particularly like a part of your work as an artist, and it feels like maybe that changes in the face of the past year. How does it feel now that you're on stage and you're sort of owning your roots and kind of incorporating that into the work? How has that changed for you?
I mean, let's say it was always there, but I felt that the best activism I could do was being a good musician, being articulate, being funny, being, whatever, those things that then people by association, often being like, in a lot of cases, the only Palestinian that a lot of people knew. They would often tell me that. So feel this sort of like a burden to then be this, I think I was playing a subconscious game to be the likable Arab or the likable Palestinian. And then this has forced me to, in a way, to realize, I think, that there was an illusion in that. A lot of the wool was pulled from our eyes in terms of the societies that we're living in. And that I only realized that I was subconsciously going along with that. So I had to kind of rebuild myself. I'm in a process of doing that according to like my actual values and speaking to what I feel is important. That's like an ongoing process. It's sort of restructuring everything for me.
Yeah, I can imagine like that restructuring process is not something that is particularly, finite. It's not like you arrive at a certain turning point. We're also very fortunate that Saeed literally wrote the book on this, because you wrote Her First Palestinian and a collection of short stories. But in this, like, this is a frame that you introduced, Saeed, the idea of feeling the pressure to sort of be the representative for an entire people and everything that they have gone through and everything that, somebody sort of thinks about them. How do you think that dimension has changed in the last year, Saeed, as a Palestinian writer, but also as someone who, when introduced as a Palestinian writer, is now kind of freighted with the weight of the last year? That's
the real thing.
Yeah.
In terms of what you talk about of being freighted with that weight. A lot of the early days of my life as a writer, and my life as a writer is not, as far as the public is concerned, is not that old. It was only like 2 years ago that my book was published, although it felt like much longer. A lot of the early days, I was presented as, here's somebody who writes literature. It just so happens to be about Palestinians, but it's a literature like anybody else's literature. And yes, Palestinians have their specific political and social context that impinges on the characters. But that's really the extent of it. You can read them or you can read the stories for other reasons. Once the war started, all that was out the door. The thin veneer that was out the door. Now you are the Palestinian that people want to come to, as I think John alluded to. For some kind of A, solace, B, leadership, 3, representation, a whole bunch of things become put on you, and you want to take it on too as an artist, because you feel again that you're otherwise useless if you don't take it on. So I no longer think of it as a burden. Actually, it felt like a burden before October 7th. I now think of it as a responsibility that I'm happy to discharge. It's one that is a difficult one, and it's a taxing one. But if I'm able to do it, I'm in a better position than many others who wish they could do it. And so for me, it's something I embrace, even though it's a tough load sometimes.
I think that actually what Saeed said applies to me as well. At first, it was daunting, uncomfortable. And then when you get used to the water, so to speak, then you actually, oh, no, this is actually something that it's not only something that I'm okay with, it's actually been burning inside me for a long time. I've been suppressing this. So this has actually brought, if anything, I became more myself in it.
Yeah. I should just say, my name is Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This show is called Commotion. I'm here with the author Saeed Teebi and John Kameel Farah, and he's a composer and visual artist, and we're talking about how the world has changed for artists in the Palestinian diaspora. I want you guys to take a moment just to listen to a part of a conversation that Tom Power had with Nima Hassan on Q. She's a Palestinian-Canadian rapper who performs as Nemesis. She had just signed a record deal days before October 7th.
And then October 7th happened, and then a few days later, they dropped me. They insinuated that I was like, I can't even say the word on air. So my lawyer called me and told me, and he said they don't even want to talk to you. It's been terminated. And you have to keep in mind, at this point, I hadn't even made a statement myself. I was just reposting, posting from news outlets and everything. I hadn't put my face to make a proper statement yet. And like, I was crying a lot. I was watching like my entire feed, like everybody that I've paid, worked with, broke bread with, like I've met your whole family, you've met my family, I've spent the last few years building this EP with, were just unfollowing me. Like nobody was talking to me and I was fully ostracized. I didn't know what to do and it still hasn't stopped. And I didn't think there was going to be a future in music. And I was mourning my relationships with all of these friends, these people that I've confided in over the last like 3 or 4 years. And then I'm also mourning this entire album that I'm releasing now because it was ready. It was sitting. It was ready to go.
It was done.
The label that I was signing with heard this exact album and they said, after they dropped me, they said, do you know how much this hurts us? This is probably album of the year, but there's no way to market that.
No way to market that. This is probably album of the year, but there's no way to market that. That is part of Tom Power's conversation with Nemesis on Q. She ended up releasing that album independently back in September. Saeed, I'm curious if you hear that conversation and maybe try to expand the lens for a moment beyond that particular example. Do you think that attitude, this idea that there's no way to market art by Palestinians right now, has fundamentally changed in the past year? Do you think that's changed at all?
I think it has. I think that attitude is a result of most of Western society being beholden to a particular narrative, and that narrative was primarily the one that's sort of promulgated by Israel and most of Western governments about who is sort of good and who is bad, who is evil, etc. And a lot of it is sort of larded with inaccurate history, with Orientalist type of attitudes, etc. But what we've seen in the past year is a significant shifting of the narrative. The narrative is simply no longer the same, even though those in power, whether it's in the government or in the media, continue to try to peddle it. It's one that most people, I would say, on the ground level, are not really buying. And so, when it comes to the concept of a market, I think the market right now is hungry for Palestinian art. It's especially readers who are by nature inquisitive people, and they've sensed the shifting of the narrative. They've seen, the videos on their TikToks or on their Instagrams, and they want to know more. They want to understand it at a deeper level. They know that they've been sold a bill of goods, and now they would like to see what's the alternative narrative. And so there's a hunger for that. Now, whether the market actually satisfies it, that's another story. People who have a lot of faith in the market will say that you should see a ton of Palestinian writing. You should see a ton of alternative narratives, even from non-Palestinians, and hopefully we will. But whether there's a market for it, yes, there's a huge market, I would say.
I agree with you. I sort of detected that hunger. I've detected that hunger as you get more and more writers who are writing into this moment. And obviously, publishing is also specifically like an industry that generally moves slower than other industries. I think like the idea of a book takes a year and a half at least to sort of turn around. I'm curious sort of to see what happens in that particular space. But John, maybe I'll kick it over to you. Do you feel like that sentiment has changed, at least in music, the idea that there's no way to market art by Palestinians right now?
I mean, the word marketing just, it's like oil and water in my brain. So I feel I'm the least qualified person to talk about marketing. That's fair. But I can say, adjacent words. I had many concerts canceled, not specifically, a record deal like Nemesis did, but concerts canceled specifically in Europe and in Germany. And so that's been like a sort of a cataclysm just on a personal level. But it was clear to me right from the beginning a year ago, it was apparent to me without even having to watch it unfold that, first of all, knowing that this massive ethnic cleansing was coming, the terms of how, you could just sort of feel it coming like an avalanche. And I knew that I could either lay low and somehow be quiet through the whole thing and then continue getting concerts in sort of established venues throughout Europe. And that was quite obvious I wouldn't be able to live with myself. I mean, it's just, there's no question. I mean, I asked myself the question at first, but it became very clear that I couldn't. And now it's just been a restructuring of playing for audiences that I feel that they align with my values somehow. With everything that I say, I feel that there's this responsibility, even right now, as I'm speaking to you right now. Oh, you're in the spot that you could lighten the suffering of people, especially in Gaza, for example, with your words. And it ends up being this, so you want to direct absolutely everything towards that because of that enormous sense of urgency that's there, but that can also become crippling. So you have to kind of like learn to just sort of do what you normally do. And it's struggling to find a balance between those things, just speaking to that and not letting it paralyze you.
John, that's an immense amount of pressure. That's an immense amount of pressure to put on yourself and your art. Like I guess that's a little bit what I wanted to talk about, Saeed, is that it kind of feels in one aspect, like between the poems and the writing and the music from people like Musab Abu Toha to Isabel Hamad to Nemesis to yourself, like it's been such a productive period from so many Palestinian artists and Palestinian creators. And then on the other hand, it kind of feels like very little has changed in some regards. Do you struggle with this idea of futility? Is futility even the right frame of looking at the creation of art, Saeed? Or is actually it's not actually about, usefulness versus uselessness. It's about expression or something else. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think people always remember the moments where the dam breaks, where there's a massive change that irretrievably alters everything. What people don't remember are all those sort of incremental rising of the water behind the dam, right? That led to the breaking of it. And so the moment that we're in is in a moment of incremental change, and we have to be constantly reminding ourselves and other people who are allies or other people who are sympathetic that even though it seems that we're not doing much, we are changing things. We're changing things in minute ways until such time that everything will have accumulated and there's a massive change. So it's important to recognize the victories. It's important to know, for example, that Scotiabank, just for one example, has divested of some of its holdings in Israeli arms as a result of pressure that was put on it by the arts community in Canada.
Because of its sponsorship of the Giller Prize. Yeah, that's right.
Which sponsored the Giller Prize. So, and there's a lot of other examples like this. Just the sheer amount of people who are aware of what's happening. For example, the readership of my own book. A ton of people only picked it up after the events of October 7th because they wanted to know more. And, they would often message me and say, oh, hey, I didn't know any of those things. And now I want to read more Palestinian stuff. I want to educate myself. Look, I don't think that artists are supposed to change the world necessarily. What we're supposed to do, if we're supposed to do anything, is to reflect it, is to create good art and reflect the world and reflect ourselves. And to the extent that we can do that, and then it also helps change it, then great. But, that's how I see my role in it anyway.
I think that's really worth sitting with, the idea of, we remember the moment that the dam breaks, but we don't remember all the incremental pressure that leads it to break. That's a good frame, and I'm going to sit with that a little bit longer. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask each of you to maybe end with a recommendation. Is there a work of art that you're drawing a lot of inspiration from, or maybe a Palestinian artist whose work that you think we should know? John, why don't I start with you?
There is an incredible artist, but I think he's very hard to find on the internet. He's in the corners of the internet. He's not a big person, on YouTube. Dirar Kalash, and this guy is a musical hero to me. Dirar Kalash. He is a kind of just a creative force. He's a force of nature who from the North Galilee area, who plays all instruments, does free improvisation, does noise, creates artwork in this kind of free, raw way that I just find so courageous. And I wish I could be like that. And when another person or another group that came to mind, they're actually not Palestinian, but two Jewish comedians doing a podcast called the Bad Hasbara podcast, Matt Lieb,
good name,
and Daniel Mate. Yeah. And they have given me some of my only genuine laughter Apart from being extremely informative, it's always probing, trying to find the truth. But given a lot of people like myself, moments of genuine laughter and maybe guilt-free laughter. I don't know how to put it. Like, you don't feel like you're just being self-indulgent because we're all in it together, kind of thing. So they are kind of like heroes to me.
I really appreciate those recommendations. Saeed, you get the last word here. What recommendation would you like to give?
I'm also going to give two Palestinian artists, two Palestinian writers, one who's more contemporary, Adania Shibli. If you haven't read her novel, Minor Detail, it's about the period right after the Nakba, or the period that resulted in the creation of the State of Israel. And it's a triggering book. It's a tough book, but it examines a sexual assault that happened at that time, and it looks at its ramifications through the years. That's one. And now for a deep cut, I recommend Ghassan Kanafani, who is one of my greatest influences. But specifically, I recommend Men in the Sun, which is about not the horrors of the Nakba, but about the displacement of Palestinians in the Nakba, one of the earliest displacements. So I suggest those two.
I think that is a good place to leave it. John, Saeed, I really appreciate your time, appreciate your energy and your willingness to engage here. This has been tremendous. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Elamin. Appreciate it.
Saeed Teebi is an author, and John Kameel Farah is a composer and pianist currently based in Berlin and Toronto. If you happen to be in Vancouver this Saturday, you can hear John perform compositions like this at a venue called The Annex. This is a piece called Improvisation on an Olive Tree. And if you missed my conversation from a couple of weeks ago with two Jewish artists about how their lives have changed since October 7th, you can find that on our podcast feed as well. This is it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. I'll see you then.